trial of 7.
That is my right, I do believe.
What the fuck is a trial of 7?
Excellent question, Maegor. Give me 6 minutes. If you've seen Game of Thrones, then you will be no stranger to the concept of a trial by combat, an alternative form of trial in Westeros that can be invoked by the accused, where instead of a council of judges, their fate is determined by a melee. The idea being that innocence or guilt is decided by the gods via the outcome. It's really unfortunate that a certain character seemed to forget about this when it would have been really useful. In the latest episode of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, we're introduced to a peculiar iteration of this custom, the trial by 7. As Prince Baelor explains to Dunk, this ancient Andal tradition that dates back millennia is a holy melee where instead of a one-on-one duel to decide the accused's judgment, 7 champions face 7 challengers, a symbolic judgment of the 7. While it might seem like a mere legal loophole for Prince Aerion to avoid facing Dunk alone, you might be surprised to learn that nearly 170 years before the events of this show, Westeros saw a trial by 7 that changed the course of its history. It occurred during one of the bloodiest periods the continent has ever known, the reign of Maegor the Cruel. This brutal historical precedent was not merely a random dispute over a prince's honor, but the breaking point of a massive religious conflict known as the Militant Uprising that sought to extinguish the Targaryen dynasty only decades after it had begun. The seeds of this uprising were not sown by a single act of malice, but by the fundamental friction between the House of the Dragon and the Faith. While Aegon the Conqueror had maintained a delicate peace by adopting the faith of the 7, his successor, Aenys I, inherited a realm simmering with resentment. The first crack in the foundation appeared over the line of succession. Maegor, Aegon's younger son and a warrior of terrifying repute, was the presumed heir until the birth of Aenys' daughter, Rhaena. To bridge the divide, Queen Visenya proposed a Valyrian solution, a marriage between Maegor and Rhaena, but the High Septon, with his strong opposition to incest, forced Maegor into a political union with his own niece, Cerys Hightower. The marriage was a hollow victory for the faith. After 14 years of a cold, childless union, Maegor's patience snapped. In 39 AC, he claimed a second wife, Alice Harroway, in a Valyrian ceremony officiated by Visenya herself. To the faith, this was not just bigamy, it was an abomination. Aenys, a king who craved love more than respect, found himself caught between his brother's defiance and the High Septon's fury. He chose a middle path that satisfied no one, exiling Maegor to Pentos. But Aenys' greatest folly was yet to come. In 41 AC, he wed his daughter Rhaena to his son and heir, Aegon. The faith's response was a declaration of holy war. They branded Aenys King Abomination. The poor fellows, a ragged army of pious smallfolk, and the warriors' sons, an order of anointed knights, took up the sword. Aenys, broken by the stress of a realm turning against him, fled to Dragonstone and perished shortly after, leaving the throne to a vacuum of power. The vacancy of the Iron Throne did not last. Dowager Queen Visenya flew to Pentos on the back of Vhagar to retrieve her son. Maegor returned not as a negotiator, but as a conqueror. He was crowned on Dragonstone, his claim punctuated by the execution of Grand Maester Gawain, who dared to mention the rights of Aenys' elder son. Maegor then descended upon King's Landing on the back of Balerion the Black Dread. He raised the Targaryen banner on Visenya's hill, challenging any who questioned his right to rule. The challenge was answered by Sir Daemon Morrigan, the Grand Captain of the Warriors' Sons, an order of Westerosi knights sworn to the faith of the 7. Maegor agreed to settle this challenge with a trial of 7. In the theology of the faith, a trial by combat is based on the belief that the gods will grant strength to the righteous party, While a standard trial by combat involves one champion for each side, a trial by 7 is a rarer, more holy iteration of this practice. The tradition finds its roots in Andalos, the ancestral home of the Andals. It is predicated on the sacred nature of the number 7, representing the 7 aspects of the deity: the father, mother, maiden, crone, warrior, smith, and stranger. By fielding 7 combatants, the participants believe they invite the full gaze and judgment of the gods. Maegor's trial took place on the grounds of the Sept of Remembrance, which stood where the dragon pit would later be built. The champions fighting on the king's behalf were largely drawn from his supporters and household, the first being Dick Bean, a man-at-arms in service of House Targaryen. He was followed by Sir Bernard Brune, Sir Bram of Blackhull, Sir Rayford Rosby, Sir Guy Lothston, and Lord Lucifer Massey. Fighting for Sir Daemon Morrigan were 6 of his warriors' sons: Sir Lyle Bracken, Sir Harris Hawpe, Sir Aegon Ambrose, Sir Dickon Flowers, Sir Willem the Wanderer, and Sir Garibald of the 7 Stars, all of which were knights who had renounced their lands and titles to serve the 7. The trial was a chaotic melee of steel and horseflesh. Unlike a structured joust, this was a fight to the death. The warriors' sons were renowned for their zealotry and skill, but Maegor was a warrior of peerless ferocity, wielding the Valyrian steel sword Blackfire. The fighting was so intense that one by one the combatants fell, shields were shattered, and the ground became a slurry of mud and blood. Eventually, Maegor was the only man left standing on his side, but he was faced by the final remaining warriors' sons. In a final, desperate exchange, Maegor slew his opponents but took a devastating blow to the head, collapsing just as the last of the Faith's champions died. For 28 days, the king lay silent. The Faith whispered that the gods had judged him after all. Everything changed on the 30th day. Maegor awoke with a hunger for vengeance that would define his epithet: the Cruel. He mounted Balerion and, without warning, dove upon the Sept of Remembrance on Rhaenys' hill. While the warriors' sons were at morning prayer, the Black Dread unleashed a torrent of dragon flame. Thousands burned within the Sept walls, and it is said the screams of the dying echoed through the streets of the capital for hours, and a thick black pall of smoke hung over King's Landing for 7 days. The trial proved Maegor's right to rule in the eyes of the law. However, it did not end the war. Rather, it escalated it into a decade of horrific, scorched earth campaigning. Turning both noble and commoner alike against him, Maegor's ruthlessness against his enemies cost him what little remained of his reputation, with his trial of 7 being one of many in the list of actions that ultimately led him to his gruesome demise. A cruel end for a cruel king.